Hello, this is Jim Tolles. Welcome to my latest live streaming talk here on YouTube. Today we're going to be talking about confronting core issues. So while everybody is taking some time to log on and settle in, I encourage you to take a few deep breaths and breathing in and breathing out. Allowing yourself to drop into your body, to settle in, to open up. I always do this at the beginning of these talks because the more relaxed we are, the more we open, the more open we are, the more we can hear what really feels true to us. When we're not relaxed, we're usually still caught in our heads, still thinking in the same old program loops that we have, and so then we just kind of pick and choose the things we hear, which, depending on the ego, means we'll pick and choose things that make us feel bad because we don't think we're good enough, right? A self-worth issue, which is a major core issue we may get into today. Or we'll pick the things that make us feel good because we don't want to look at things that might make us feel bad. And so either way, we don't really hear the things we need to hear. We block it out. And this is a big problem on the spiritual path. The unwillingness to hear truth is not a core issue. It is one of the things that grows out of core issues. And we'll talk a lot about kind of how to identify different layers, different depths of these rather significant issues we carry. If you're new to me, I tend to kind of free flow and talk for about around 30, 40 minutes, depending. And then I really get into people's questions. But your questions can go into the right-hand chat pod on the screen. And you have to be logged in a YouTube account. That's just how that works, to be able to post a question. And I reply intuitively. So if I don't reply, it's not because I don't like your question or anything like that. It's just I don't have something naturally arising from my own inner self, my own intuition to share. That tends to be pretty rare. I usually answer most questions posted, but it's just something to understand about using your voice in integrity and staying with the process of what's in front of you. And there's never really a definition of how you're supposed to act. And that's surprising to the ego self. And that's actually what a lot of core issues really do, is they give you definition. Even if it's a crappy definition, that gives you a definition about who you are and how to interact and all those sorts of things. So when we step out of more and more of our issues, everything becomes fluid. So in that way, that's something I model, that a certain level of fluidity in how I will interact with you. But as I said, for the most part, I usually answer all questions, so don't be shy. If you can't hear me, please let me know. And actually, it's great if somebody could just type in the chat pod if you can let me know that you're hearing me just fine. I'm assuming that you can, otherwise I think I probably would have gotten a bunch of comments already saying I can't hear you. Also, on the screen where I'm talking, if you hover your mouse on the right-hand side, there are settings. So if things are not coming through particularly quickly, you can, slow it down on the choice of the quality. So there's annotation speed and quality, and quality can change it. Right now I have it streaming at 720 pixels per second. I don't know what that is, but that's a fairly high quality, so that can make me seem relatively clear. Thanks, Aaron, for letting me know that you can hear me. So everyone, just take a few more deep breaths, relax into the space, just feeling whatever you're feeling. And let's get going here. So core issues. What do I mean by a core issue? A core issue is kind of a major issue that out of which a bunch of our other issues grow out of it, our ways of thinking about ourselves, our ways of interacting. Think of it more kind of like the base of the plant. Sometimes they're the roots, and I feel like, we kind of have to address the roots, very early on, at least the roots as far as I see them. And the roots and really kind of the most core, the most central issues really go into our physiological instincts. And as far as I can see, and you're welcome to offer your own opinions, there are really three. that we confront and we deal with, and from these roots everything grows up. All the core issues grow up out of, and these are the central fundamental issues of living. The first one being the fear of death, right? The drive to survive. The fear of pain, which for some people is linked to a fear of death, and for others it isn't. And then finally, the drive to continue the species, drive for procreation. And I really see those three as driving most of our interactions. And the reason I separate pain from death is because, while for many people, pain is an indicator that your life might be in jeopardy, and that's definitely very true, at times, emotional pain, for instance, can be so horrible that the idea of death, right, is no longer scary. Or it can be physical pain. So somebody who's having terrible chronic illness, and I think we have to acknowledge that happens for people, that they can have some sort of physical illness that's so terrible that enduring the pain and the fear of continuing to endure pain is far greater than the fear of death. And so I'm not condoning suicide. I'm just simply pointing out the separation between the fear of pain and the fear of death. And of course, the third one being that drive to procreate. Whether or not you want children is kind of irrelevant to the instinctual body. The reason that we have sexual drives is to continue the species. And that's part of our animal heritage. So those three really are kind of sitting at the foot of everything. And they're not things that we're just going to think away today. It's just things to sort of understand. And I invite you to investigate in yourself if those are really your three. Or if there's something else that I haven't thought of, because I haven't thought of everything. And if so, feel free to let me know what you think. Because out of those things, a lot of things start to grow. And society has found different ways for us to kind of address those different needs. So, and we've done a lot through kind of gendering ourselves. So like, this is the men's role and this is the female role. And those aren't necessarily necessary. That's kind of redundant. But it seems to be what a lot of society's done. So for instance, men are supposed to kind of attend towards survival means as part of, their role in society. And it's a big deal for men if they don't have a job, right? That's a job is a representation of how you find your means to survive. And so that becomes kind of a driving purview for men in society. And the family has been a structure that's been very successful in matching the men's ability to get all those resources, getting men and women together. And that's, as I said, this is an instinctual thing. It has nothing to do with your gender preference. I don't particularly have any opinion about, who you prefer to be with. Love is love, follow your heart. But the instinctual body wants children. Right? Because that's part of its goal, is like keep you alive long enough to get children to continue the species. Okay, so now we're seeing in society that you can make money or you can get your means to survive, in a certain way, and that's usually being thrown into the men's bucket as society is changing. Women can do that too. Obviously, they always could. And I'm not saying that they haven't done that in the past. I'm speaking more stereotypically because it starts to reveal some of the core issues that grow up out of it. So on the other side, women are more tasked with procreation for obvious reasons, right? They carry the children. And so part of that, is a great demand of their resources, and they need additional resources to make that successful. And so men particularly, as I said, once again, this is working out of the heterosexual paradigm because that's what makes babies, not because it's your preference. It's not because it's the right way by any means. It's just one way, and it's been successful on the survival level. There are 7 billion people on this planet, so clearly it's been successful to a certain degree. So women need to get two things now. They need to get those resources, and so men have often been seen as the means to resources and to continue the species. And so those are two core issues. And where men, once they start to get, all these resources and whatnot, and so they're taking care of their means to survive, their only interest in relationship can be sex because of how things are kind of working out in this way. Once again, it's not saying that all men are just out for sex. I'm just sort of showing you from my particular perspective how we start to create these paradigms that are being driven by these instinctual, most basic fundamental issues. And as we start to create these paradigms, certain core issues naturally start to come out. So it naturally starts to come out that women can be hyper aware and interested in relationship, because relationship has been a means to getting support. And this has gone on so long for so many generations that many women don't even realize that that's what they're doing when they're interested in men, that they're looking for support and they're looking for a means to help continue the species. It seems so utterly raw when I start to speak of it in this way, right? And to kind of see that this is how we're really just being driven by our instinctual body and we think we're civilized, to be kind of surprising. So this starts to set up the basic field I think a lot of people are still operating from. And so what happens if you don't have like a relationship for women, right? You start to feel bad. You start to have these senses of self-doubt, right? And you have these self-worth issues that can kind of come out of that. And self-worth issues are a big thing. In many regards in society, a lack of self-worth is simply a sense that you are failing on some level to achieve something, but we don't really usually know what it is. Or we think it has to do with these things we're told to have, like have a job and, have a relationship, right? These are big messages in society. When you're meeting somebody for the first time, often one of the common questions is, what do you do? And that essentially means, what do you do for a living? Which is asking about, are you able to survive on your own, really? But we don't think of it, right? It's just something that's so practiced and so regularly asked that we just assume that we're supposed to have something that we do, and that it's not okay if we don't. And so a lot of self-worth issues for men tend to be around not having the ability to take care of themselves, right? Because that's got sort of codified in society as the thing that men need to do. And then a lot of things continue to kind of grow out of this space that we're creating for ourselves. And it starts to get more warped and twisted and kind of strange what it means to survive. Right? So the most basic survival is having food, water, shelter, really, and, clothing to keep you warm if you need to be kept warm in the climate you live in. But as we go, the means to survive gets kind of twisted in the ego society, right? And so these other things start to get added in about, let's continue with men for the moment, what it means to be a man, right? And so now it's not just getting resources purely to survive, it's now getting resources to show that you have resources and getting awards to show that you have sort of more external approval for this ability to gather resources and things like that, and it just keeps kind of twisting. It's like to want to be a billionaire is an insane thing because nobody needs that much money, right? It's an inappropriate gathering of resources. It's too much. It should be spread out to the whole of our community. But as things keep going, it's like something else starts to grow out of this, out of the roots, out of the trunk of the plant, right? It starts to create all these branches. So just continue with this plant metaphor. And so you see this kind of sense that you don't have enough. It also gets fed into the whole process. And that's probably coming out of a lot of old unresolved emotional issues that happened, like the Great Depression. There have been famines throughout history. And so it's deeply drilled into people that not having enough is bad, right? Because it would inhibit our survival and we could potentially die. We could potentially be in pain and suffering. And so that's a major core issue of this whole not having enough, that's linked up very closely with a sense of I'm not going to survive. And so that grows into many different iterations until we really address it. So that's something that starts to grow up, and it can absolutely grow up for women. It's why a lot of women will cling on to a man in an unhealthy relationship, especially if she's if she has children, right, that she has to care for. And let's step it way back. Why that mindset has been really drilled into women, that you have to stay for the kids, sort of a thing. we haven't had social safety nets for millennia. You basically had your family structure, and if it was good enough that maybe you could go live with a sister, then there was some means of getting out of something that was very abusive or unhealthy in general. But otherwise, that really wasn't existing as far as I know in most societies. Maybe some of you know a little bit more history on that, if there were any sort of social safety nets in like Rome or some of the bigger empires. But my general understanding is there weren't any of those things. And this is, I think, one of the great leaps forward in Western culture, and hopefully in other cultures. I don't know who all adopts these types of things. To have things like welfare and all these other assistance programs. So it means that you can get your means to survival. You can get support from other groups and organizations to move out of unhealthy situations. Yet the mindset for, once again, still speaking from this whole kind of instinctual procreative thing, that you have to stay with a partner to survive, particularly women staying with men. I mean, you can certainly have unhealthy relationships with, two men and two women, and that mindset will still potentially linger there. It says, I have to be with this person to survive. And I have to be with this person to help my kids survive. And so that's a core issue that will influence how you treat yourself, what happens to your children, what happens in a relationship, and a whole variety of ways of what you see, what you're willing to talk about, right? You'll start to change how you talk because you're trying to manage the situation in some respect, to try and stay in it or to make it work. If it's an abusive situation, you'll start to believe more and more probably that you aren't worthwhile, because you're in an abusive relationship. But the deeper roots of the issue, they're going to really drive these things, and that's part of what makes the core issues that grow out of the fundamental issues really, truly awful and powerful. So, and then things grow out of that, right? Unwillingness to speak your truth, right? That's not a core issue. That's just something that starts to grow out of that sense of self-worth, the sense of needing to be in something that's unhealthy. You can look at it in the from the eyes of a child too, where you have no power to get out of upsetting or abusive situations. At best, you can run away, right? So that will force children into certain kind of inner decisions. It's not even necessarily conscious because, you're a child. And so any sort of abuse or childhood trauma in and of itself becomes a core issue that is just an absolute pain to to help somebody heal. And it's linked very closely into survival because family is linked into survival, right? When you're a child from 0 to 5, you have no ability to take care of yourself. You need others to take care of yourself. So whatever is happening is just what you have to endure. So trauma in and of itself, and I may go into this a little bit later, is its own major core issue, and it's not something that's easily uprooted in and of itself. And trauma and many core issues are stunting. So they stunt your growth in other areas, depending on the issue and what you thought you could do and what you thought was possible in the given situation. So I hope you're starting to get a sense of what we're building here, right? Just once again, honoring the instinctual body. We have to start with that because it's still there. If we didn't have the instinctual body telling us to go have sex and to, try and survive, we would interact very differently with life. And of course, everybody has different levels of those messages from the instinctual body that drive them more or less. So, it is important to appreciate that your own inner makeup may have a higher kind of fear of death, right? That you're more easily activated just naturally by anything that might be perceived as a threat. And other people have higher sex drives, right? And some people have lower sex drives. Some people are rather asexual. It's different by each person, but this is kind of more broadly generalizing for humanity in general to understand that these things still matter. And then out of those things grow certain situations. And society has worked through a lot of different situations in certain formats, like families. And so that sense of a male and a female coming together kind of formed the basis of a lot of people's thinking about, how people are and gender roles that dominate society. And as I said before, that's just, something that's happened. It's not something I necessarily think is right or wrong. It's just one way that it's worked. And of course, many of those relationships aren't healthy relationships. People get driven into those things because society believes they work. And so a lot of people get into marriages that they don't want to be in because of these real deep and powerful fundamental issues that society keeps repeating back, right? So we get these feedback loops where people are saying, this is important, this is important, this is important. And there's a way that, because of our, what I call that 0 to 5 time frame, where we're looking to the external world to support us, where it's really the only thing that we're completely dependent upon, that kind of maintains itself too as a very, very deep and powerful core issue, that looking externally to get ourselves taken care of. And the spiritual path is a big fundamental flip on that, right? Where we start to look internally for truth, look internally for guidance about how to live and how to survive. And so that's a big change. And to me, I think this is why I use the word maturation. Because as a child, we have to look externally. That's just how it is. But as we grow up, to truly look within is an important change of perspective, and it's an empowering one. It's really how we become a spiritual adult. The spiritual adult doesn't do what other people tell them to do. The spiritual adult goes inside to understand him or herself, to understand all these different things. Because as we go, a whole bunch of other issues keep growing out of this base plant that has been planted in us. And as I said, that trauma is its own thing, and that creates more twisted avenues. The more somebody's endured pain, the more averse they can be to anything that seems like a threat, the more they're kind of in that fight or flight mechanism that's seeing more things as threats than actually are threats, that sees anything outside a comfort zone as a threat. But their initial comfort zone has been set up in such a way that it is not a safe space. So what they see as comforting and familiar is actually threatening, and often what seems unfamiliar, that doesn't look comforting, may actually be supportive. And so that's one of the horrible ways where trauma twists the wires. And so that tends to perpetuate these negative cycles where people get drawn into unhealthy relationships again because they're familiar, which is reflecting stuff from childhood. And that tends to perpetuate other kinds of abusive situations, unfortunately. So part of healing traumatic core issues is really learning how to be with the discomfort of the trauma and be in the discomfort of new situations that are unfamiliar. So that starts to create perspective on what actually healthy interaction is and what is not healthy interaction. And this is no small thing. Core issues are going to influence you on your heart, body, mind, spirit, every level. And so that's part of the reason why today we're just kind of talking about them, which is a way of helping you to heal on any sort of mental level, right? Become aware that they're there, become aware of how you're acting them out, right? That's an important step, but it's not enough. It's like watching a YouTube video to learn how to dance. If you don't dance physically, then you haven't learned how to dance. Doesn't matter if your mind can repeat back well, then you just do your left and your right and you twirler, and that's not enough. Trauma is just truly, truly awful because so many different things get crosswired, speaking up when you shouldn't speak up, or, shouting out when you shouldn't be shouting out, or staying quiet when you should be shouting out, right? Everything just kind of gets warped in a way that is just truly terrible. And of course, as we go, The more upset feelings, the more negative cycles you go through, it starts to draw you towards things to make the bad feelings go away, quite simply. This leads to addiction, it leads to workaholism. It can lead to certain levels of trying to do good for everyone else, to fix everyone else's problems because you don't know how to fix yourself. These things are often done very unconsciously. You don't really understand what you're trying to suppress. Many people, you create so many mental blocks even believing that you have a problem. I'm not just talking with addiction, I mean with the trauma part of it. And this absolutely applies to general core issues like having an issue with lack of self-worth. Not really feeling, let's say you didn't feel really particularly loved and acknowledged growing up. And so then there are all sorts of ways where you can kind of decide, well, it's not important, or you're just kind of living in your mind all the time and you're not allowing yourself to feel anything or let anybody get close to you that you might feel something. And if somebody starts to get emotionally close to you, you immediately want to push them away. And there's an interesting, discussion we can even have about, how much of love is just a sense of having our physical needs met, from childhood. How interlink those two things actually are. Because they talk in psychology about secure attachments and insecure attachments, and a lot of that has to do with when something's upset for you as a child, did somebody come and attend to that need? And most of a child's needs really are around like, can somebody feed me? Somebody change my diaper? Obviously, I talk about love a lot, and so clearly I think love is important, isn't it? The emotion of it, the physical interaction and expression of love and affection with hugs and kind touches and things like that. I think those are absolutely important. But I also think they kind of reinforce the sense that you're being cared for, right? The very physiological sense, and that it kind of engenders a trust that you're going to continue to be cared for. And if you don't feel like you're getting that, from a very early age on, then you tend to be more and more insecure about life and not trusting towards life. And of course, that distrust tends to create more walls, and you tend to keep more people at bay, and this creates up more of these kind of negative feedback loops that maintain the sense that life isn't trustworthy, that you're not getting your needs met. So as always, a lot of core issues are going to take you right back into childhood. And that's really where you have to go to fully root them out. And it goes through like being able to conceptually understand and being able to emotionally feel it. And then even in the body, and this is a piece I think a lot of people miss, the body energy holds on to a lot of pain, holds on to a lot of upset. And learning to relax into the pain does a lot of things. First, it releases any of these pent-up old energies, and it starts to switch us out of these upset, fearful modes. And I really think it is just kind of, on a physiological level, teaching us to go towards the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest versus the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system. And part of core issues really kind of keeps the sympathetic nervous system, the sense that we're in some sort of danger, that we have to fix something to change ourselves or change a situation, constantly going. And trauma keeps it really, really going. And so the more that energy is moving through you and all the biochemistry is moving through you, the more you tend to act out the issue and reinforce it and reinforce the need to be in that sort of mode. And it just keeps going round and round and round. So coming into relaxation is part of simply breaking the cycle. And that's another reason why at every start of every talk I do, I'm encouraging you to come into your breath. Take a few deep breaths, because that's too is part of retraining the body to move towards relaxation. To move towards relaxation regularly at any given time, because generally speaking, if we get caught up into that sympathetic nervous system, we're going right back into the most basic instinctual things that have been driving us all along, and we're reinforcing them. Each time you move back towards an old behavior, you're just reinforcing it to your brain, into your body, into your heart, into your energy. So you're just telling this thing is still kind of a mechanism, kind of a machine, that this is what you want to do. This is how you're going to interact with something difficult or upsetting or even enjoyable, right? You're going to go into this mode. And so moving into that relaxation, just taking a few deep breaths, again and again, and just really, really building it into your muscles, into your heart, and the whole memory of your being, that this is where you go regularly, and this is where you want to generally stay, makes a huge difference. And I think it's a fundamental rewiring of the instinctual body that needs to happen in the human being, because we can't keep acting in this fight or flight mode. It just causes us too much trouble. It's not particularly mindful. We don't particularly think well when we do it. So these are some initial thoughts that are kind of coming up as I talk. If there are particular core issues that you want to talk about, feel free to write it in the chat pod. Confronting core issues is just one of those things that you have to be in it for the long haul. Other issues, let's say you don't speak your voice, right? You go to a couple speaking classes, you start to figure out what you want to say, and then, in a couple months, you're starting to speak what you care about more. But the underlying, let's say, lack of self-worth issue that, has you hiding your voice, you may have cut off that branch of not speaking up, but now, it's got other branches that you start to engage with. And so learning to speak up is one of the ways that will start to kind of guide you towards that deeper issue of why don't I feel worthy? Why don't I feel worthy to share my voice, to express my love, to connect to someone in intimacy, however it's manifesting. Why don't I feel worthy enough to have a good job? That's often a big thing where a lot of people don't feel worthy to take on a job with responsibility, or a job that might challenge them, or just a good paying job, right? They think they need to stay in some crappy, low paying job. And of course, that has ramifications. See, that's the thing about core issues. There's a lot of ramifications that come out of that if you don't feel good enough to take on a good job, now you're probably going to be more of a sense of financial scarcity. Well, what happens when we do that? Well, then that instinctual I'm not going to survive thing kicks in again, right? That we talk about, that fear of pain and suffering and the fear of death. And so that keeps you constantly anxious, which can lead you towards other ways of trying to self-medicate. Maybe it's prescription drugs. Maybe it's video games, right? And getting kind of lost into that. Maybe it's sugar and overeating, right? There's just so many different ways that we start to have to self-medicate when we don't address a core issue. And it has a lot of different impacts in our life. And so we learn to accept that they're there. And we learn to start to engage more mindfully. We learn to start to identify how they come up, how we act them out. Core issues aren't particularly hidden either. They're usually hidden in plain sight. And the more you do your inner work, and I'm sure some of you have done this, the more you start to realize they're influencing a lot. And the more you start to realize you may never have really made a conscious decision in your life. So it's very humbling to the ego self. That's like, oh, I'm making decisions. I'm not being controlled by things. And it's like, yes, you are. Most of humanity is. So I have a question from Paul. Could you speak to the feeling of being unlovable and fundamentally flawed from childhood emotional abuse? Well, that is what abuse says, right? When somebody is physically hitting you or emotionally abusing you or just generally neglecting you, it's telling you that you're not worthy. And I think on the fundamental level, Paul, that there's some sort of interpretation in our heads that says, if I'm being treated in this way, I should not exist. Or I'm not worthy to be alive on some sort of level. This is obviously kind of a theory of mine, but it kind of feels true. And I encourage you to kind of explore that for yourself. And so when we feel like, our physical aliveness is being denied in some particular way, it's deeply depressing. And that's a terrible feeling. And so we have to do a couple of different things, right, to kind of emotionally survive in those situations. And for children, it's kind of act it out, shut it out. And that's or you could potentially run away. But so generally speaking, it ends up being one of these two. It's like you're going to act out what's happening to you, right? So it's kind of a way we're trying to get rid of the pain. If it's like emotional boost, somebody's yelling at us all the time. And the other one is just you shut down because you just don't want to feel it. And of course, when we're numb, we can't feel much of anything, which is an awful experience in and of itself. So if you've been shutting down, right, part of healing is going to be opening up and then feeling all the stuff that kind of got stuck. Whenever we shut down, it's just like enclosing all the upset energy inside us. And so you start to breathe into these different things and you start to notice when you shut down, and once again, you use that breath to relax into whatever the situation is where you start to notice you're shutting down. And sometimes that's a journey in and of itself, just to start to notice when and how you shut down. Acting out, I think, may be a little bit easier to notice. Because, when someone's really shut down, they can be so numb they just have no idea that they're even numb, which is unfortunate. But acting out, that tends to be a little bit louder, whether it's somebody's always constantly lost in sadness, somebody who's getting angry all the time, somebody who's just constantly anxious, right? Those are more pronounced, that something is being acted out, something's upset. So those things are a little bit easier to kind of follow inwards. And as I often talk about with my students, we follow it into the body. Because where something's happening in the body, that's where we want to go. That's where memories are often stuck. They can be stuck in the chest or the shoulders, the hips, the stomach. Those are the usual big places to go. And you breathe into them and you relax and you feel awful for a while. And you just have to be willing to stick with that awful feeling. And as you go, eventually, something breaks down. And so with that breaking down, things get messy again. And we have to now really choose to be emotionally uncomfortable. But now we can do it from a place of being mindful, versus when you're a child, you don't know how to be mindful of these things. Nobody's teaching you that. They're teaching you the opposite, usually, that you're not worthy and you're not lovable and you feel like you shouldn't exist and you feel like you've done something wrong. It can be super confusing for a child. And so all those feelings come back. And so that's the tendency that a lot of people get stuck at this point, Paul. And it's an important point to be able to move through. Because we have that tendency to, okay, this isn't what I should be feeling, and we want to shut it back down, instead of, no, this is exactly what I want to feel, to allow it to release. We allow ourselves to just kind of witness and experience. And that's really the dance, where we can witness that we're having this human experience. And that's different than like kind of recycling. If we get lost in the feeling, we start to believe that we should be bad, or we get angry that we feel this way, then we're recycling it. We're giving it more energy, as opposed to letting its energy burn out. So we witness it, it comes up, it starts to process through, and then it goes. And sometimes it can be just that subtle, where it just goes and you're like, what was I upset about? And this is always a good thing. But a lot of times we kind of, especially with core issues, you start to kind of break off pieces. And you find yourself forgiving these instances where you couldn't take care of yourself. You forgive your mom, or you forgive your dad, an aunt, an uncle, a sibling, whoever it was that was involved, right? But piece by piece. And that gives you more perspective. And the more perspective you have, the sooner you start to notice where that core issue is showing up again, right? Where you don't feel lovable. And so this is how you interact in relationship. This is why you go drinking. This is why you've chosen a job, right? That's the nature of a big issue, like feeling unlovable or unworthy in some particular way. So then you can start to make different choices. I hope that's helpful. Let me know if it is. What other questions do people have? The flip side of breaking down core issues is the immense freedom to be yourself that you get back. It's just extraordinary. We really don't know what freedom is. We get all these messages, the instinctual messages, the messages from our initial upbringing. And we live in a society that's so lost. It's just constantly trying to self-gratify, right? And we do the self-gratification predominantly as a way to make ourselves feel good because we feel bad. You're welcome, Paul. So it's if you're at the very beginning of your spiritual journey, I can only encourage you to start to write down the things you think you like. Write down the problems you think you have, right? The journaling is a way to be self-honest, to really look at yourself and say, okay, this is where I'm at. And it can be kind of a struggle to get started at first, because we can be so used to these things and we're so bought into, like, I like drinking. Drinking is fun, right? Here's a great example. I'm saying this in quotes. I don't like drinking. I learned that a while ago. It's like my body has no interest in alcohol. Alcohol doesn't allow me to be any better of a person. Actually, it inhibits me in a lot of different ways, and I don't enjoy that at all. And it doesn't feel good to my body. It's not nourishing. Nourishing is one of those words some of you may have heard me use a lot in the past, because it's a great word to start to define what is supportive. Is something really nourishing to you? Alcohol is not. And there are plenty of stupid studies that come up where, like people saying, well, a couple of glasses of red wine is good for you, right? They start to look for, these industries look for ways to twist the truth. And we're so used to having twisted truth sent at us through marketing and things like that, that we don't know what our truth is. Now, I'm not saying all red wine would be terrible for somebody, but the more clear you are in yourself, I'm not sure how interested you would be in it, because it's a numbing agent. Alcohol is called a depressant. It depresses things. It pushes things down. And we do that because we don't like our feelings. Right? At the end of the week, people are upset and all have been triggered all week by different issues at work or at home. And they want to bury those feelings. And so they go find alcohol because that's how they have fun. But that's not fun. It's just more pain. So this is what I mean when we have to be honest with ourselves and start to really question a lot of different things earlier in your path. As you go deeper, these mental supports, these ways of thinking and intellectualizing become less important to, like, the heart of the matter. Just the general fear and pain and sadness that was felt that becomes the central basis to a lot of these core issues. And the deeper you crack through the core issues, the more you're going to work towards the fundamental issues, the fear of death, fear of pain, and that drive for procreation. And the drive for procreation is an interesting one because it doesn't come quite as much of a threat with fear. But breaking down that desire is important for a lot of you to decide, do you actually want children or not? Obviously, society says pretty loudly that we're supposed to all have children, but a lot of people should not have children. It's not in their path. They're not going to be particularly good at it because they've had a bad child upbringing, and they're going to pass that on. And so, breaking like an issue like that sexual drive and working through any desires on top of it will help you be clear about, do you want children in your life? How many children would you like in your life? And these types of things. Or even if you want a relationship, because as I said, a lot of the drive, that sex drive drives you towards relationships. Some of you are going to be completely happy being solitary, and that's not wrong. I think, once again, kind of stepping back historically, living on your own without any sort of external support system would have been tough, right? You'd have to be a subsistence farmer, really good at hunting and trapping. And I'm sure some people did that. But it certainly is a lot easier if you have a community, and family and relationships as community is really, really helpful to survive. Because, what happens if you get sick or hurt? It's nice to have other people around to help you. Well, now we live in a society where we have hospitals and things like that so we can live on our own, but we have access to those sort of communal support systems. There's a question from Amy. It says, I'm enjoying this. Thank you for sharing. I'm pregnant and due in about 7 weeks. Oh, cool. Congratulations. I hope all goes well in the final 7 weeks. It's your first child. Any suggestions or resources to help with parenting and early childhood development? I'm always going to say, do your own inner work, Amy. Because the more at peace you are with yourself, the more that's what you're going to teach your child. And the more these core issues you've inherited from your parents, even if you had a good upbringing or whatever your upbringing was like. I try not to generalize because some people were adopted or some people grew up in a foster home, right? So whatever your upbringing, even if it's particularly good, there are a lot of these social core issues that get accepted as healthy, right? Like having children. I'm not saying that you don't want children or anything like that. I'm just saying that there's a lot of these assumptions we never even look at. So the more you go inwards and do your own inner work, and the clearer you are, the more clear you can be for your child. And of course, over time, that builds up. And the child starts to see and learn experientially from you, because we all know like what people say versus what people do, that what people do is a much stronger impact for children. Experientially they start to learn, this is how I can be at peace. This is how I can interact with difficulty. Because being able to deal with our difficult inner experiences makes it tons easier to deal with anything externally difficult. And there will be. Some of it will just simply be, can you be at peace with sleep deprivation? Right? Your baby is up crying at 3 a.m, so you have to go attend to him or her. And so, how do you come to that from a place of love, right? Even though you're tired, when we get really tired, some of our core issues really do get exposed. Our sense that we can't take care of things, our sense of being out of control. Out of control is once again tends to be very much a survival thing, or an overall sense that you're not achieving those 3 fundamental things of keeping yourself safe from pain. Being sleep deprived, or let's say, you're getting up for a feeding and you've been sick, right? So now you're in pain, right? And we don't like pain, right? So when those things are getting activated, it can be difficult to move from a space of clarity and love, right? So how do we be at peace with those pains, with those difficulties that we're experiencing? Because when we can do that, even from the very beginning, I believe you just start teaching your child just these fundamental issues, these fundamental ways of living in integrity. It's like, oh, I can be sick, but I don't have to like take that feeling bad about myself out onto somebody else. I'm just going and, allowing myself to heal and whatnot, and still being open and kind. So the basis, Amy, is just keep doing your inner work. Go inside. The clearer you are, the tendency is you tend to stay in kindness. You tend to also, maybe that example of the 3 a.m. feeding, that's the night you ask your partner to say, you know what, I'm too sick to get up and do it. Can you go take care of it, That's kind of assuming you have a breast pump and, milk already in the fridge. So him or her can go get that and bring it to the child. But, you get the point. All right, I'm glad you like the answer. Hi, Jason. I'm considering talking to my family about my awakening process. One of your blog posts recently caused me to consider if this is a core issue I'm avoiding. Do you have any advice? Well, it just depends. If you're talking because you feel it's time to speak your truth to your family, that's one thing. If you're talking because you want their approval, that's a core issue. And that's going to be extremely frustrating because, generally speaking, a lot of people aren't going to be on board with sort of inner work. They're going to project, and most people in general are going to project their experiences onto you about what they think you're saying versus what you're actually saying. And it can go through the warp tunnel, house of horrors, house of mirrors sort of thing, as what you say goes from point A and becomes this other thing. It's like my glass coming out the other end as a mouse. It's like, no, I said glass. How are you seeing mouse? And that's really kind of the craziness of, other people's perspective of their core issues, because core issues warp how we see the world. The spiritual path is just taking us more and more towards clarity. That's it. It's just taking us towards clarity and seeing life as it is, not as we want it to be, not as we want it to feel. So that's something, I would sit with, if you're looking to, if it's a core issue of, once again, trying to get approval, right? And once again, that's deeply linked to family, or parents and whatnot, then, you may be in for a rocky ride. Doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, because you get to watch how you get triggered. You start to watch, what your responses are. You watch what their responses are. Doesn't mean that there couldn't be something worthwhile for them, but that can't be the reason you do it. Right? We can't presume, what what's going to be useful for other people, really, for the most part. Until somebody wants to hear that, it's just difficult. And you can try hammering your way towards, some sort of understanding. But once again, I think that needs to come from an intuition inside yourself, Jason. That there's just a sense, okay, this is time. I want to do this, right? And whatever the outcome is, whatever the outcome is. The other side of that, too, is invitation. The more I I go on this path, and the blog is a great example. The blog is an invitation to you to learn about spirituality and to connect with me in a certain way. That's really one of the ways that you can kind of look at it. I didn't go find Paul or Jason or Amy. I would not have known where to even look. Right? You guys found me. So that's one of the ways where, like, in speaking my truth, I create spaces where there's an invitation for you and other people to engage with me in that space. And so in this way, it's a fundamentally different dynamic. A lot of, what people do is kind of shout their opinions at each other. It's like, you can look at a lot of YouTube comments, and what are people doing? They're shouting their opinions. That's not necessarily, engaging in a conversation. And they shout their opinions on the YouTube videos that they put up. And I'm really not shouting my opinion, because this is just a sharing. This is a way that I enjoy to expressing myself. Whether people like it or not is kind of irrelevant. Right. And so that's an aspect of, as we move through the core issue of needing approval from others, right? Because that's a big one. As I said, that goes back to childhood and the dependence that we all have for those first 0 to 5 years and for the years after that. We just share. And because we're clear, we're usually sharing things that are kind and useful and true to us, rather than speaking from core issues in the upset ego, which tends to be angry and upset and scared and sad and all those things, and is trying to not be those things, or trying to blame something, or a whole host of different deflection and defense tactics. That's also part of, getting into your issues. You start to notice where your defense mechanisms are. Where do you keep people out, or how do you attack others, right? Those are just defenses. How do you avoid things inside yourself you don't like? What other questions do we have? We have about 9 minutes left. For anyone who's new, I do these talks for free, but if you feel like supporting me, there's a donation button on my blog. So at spiritualawakeningprocess.com, on the right-hand side, you can donate, $10, $5. You don't have to. It's just something I want to let you know about, because work like mine is built off of a whole lot of generosity from a lot of people, and I'm really grateful for it. And many of the people here in this webinar have offered generosity, and I thank you guys heartily. And on a bigger level, I think, donation is important as we try to recraft society towards a giving culture, right? As opposed to a taking and a payment demanding culture, which is what we live in right now. And so a lot of us, are very much out of practice and the whole giving, and it's an important practice in and of itself. That will actually confront some of the core issues around scarcity, which links into that fear of death, fear of pain thing that I've been talking about, right? Because that's where we really kind of glom money onto our sense of survival. And so, you can even practice. You could donate like $1 to me, or to another spiritual teacher you like, or to a nonprofit. And I just really can't encourage practicing donation and how important it is. Because as many of you know, I've talked in the past, where you put your money is what you're saying is important in life. All the biggest, things like, we could pick on the military and some of the huge machines out there, right? Tons of money went that way. That means tons of people said that this was important. And that's why it exists. So where you send your money is what you say is important. So that's my little spiel on that. The next talk I'll be doing too is going to be in October. I have a weekend intensive with one of my students coming up. And so that kind of changes my schedule. I haven't decided what it'll be about. So any other questions that people have about core issues? I think we've hit on the childhood abuse thing. We've hit on the kind of sense of unworthiness thing. There's always the sexual abuse thing, because that's just so prevalent and people don't realize how big that is. That can come in childhood or at any given time, and then that can create, any sort of trauma can create a whole bunch of core issues, right? Because you get into this space where a part of you feels in survival mode and feels like you have to constantly protect yourself. And so that sense of needing to protect yourself just grows all kinds of issues, grows all sorts of warped perceptions of where threats are, and creates all sorts of strange ways that you try and avoid those perceived threats. In many regards, anytime you feel like there's something threatening in your life, that's something to journal about. See, is this really a threat? Why am I perceiving it as such? Because unless somebody is like physically threatening you with a weapon, most of the time we feel threatened, we're not in any real danger. And it really has to do with a misperception, which is usually coming from those core ego issues. So if somebody insults, your clothing, right? You've got this issue around needing to be attractive, which may link into, once again, this need for relationship, which is being built out of a means of survival or means towards procreation or a combination of both. This is why we really work through the core issues and we start to have to deal with the fundamental issues. And I think that's a topic in and of itself. I don't pertain to have moved through my fundamental issues around fear of pain, fear of death, and urge for procreation. But I'm very much aware of them, and I'm aware of how they influence me. And as I said, that's kind of that first step, becoming more and more conscious of like what they're doing and when they're doing it. So there's a question from James. Is it necessary to involve the mind in resolving core issues, or can we just go straight to resolving it through the body? I think you have to do every level because your mind is going to have been built up out of a lot of these issues, like the lack of self-worth. So certain ways that you think about yourself and think about others are going to come out of those core issues. Resolving it through the body, of course, is super important. The deeper you go, other things sort of break down. But then when you do get to that part of the body, there's going to be a tendency for realizations to come out of it. So the mind starts to heal itself. So it's still part of the process. No part of ourselves can be exempted. Thanks for the question. And thanks for everybody's questions and comments so far. And as I said, the great thing about working through these big issues is the amount of freedom that comes back to you. And you really can live your life any way that you want. And that, to the ego self sounds random or uncertain, or like we might do harmful things, but it's really not. And the more you are free and at peace, you don't really want to hurt anything or yourself. And you just kind of go towards things that are, like I said, are nourishing, are supportive, are connective, at least in the human sense, because we're always connected to the divine. Understanding that sort of depth of presence, that we're always connected to the divine, is part of dissolving those core issues, that you just start to allow yourself to be in those spaces of connection inside yourself. You don't need to go anywhere to achieve. You don't need to go to India. You don't need to meditate. You're already connected, all of you right now. You just start to remember. And that's really kind of the big thing, and probably my last point I'll talk about. The whole spiritual awakening thing on one particular level really is a remembrance. It's a remembrance of who you already are, of what reality is. And all these other things, including core issues, no matter how nasty and how big they seem, they really are illusions. I mean, I wouldn't know if you guys didn't tell me any of the things going on with you as far as the issues that you're confronting. Right? They don't exist. They only exist because you believe in them and you act them out. And so that's, to me, always kind of the best news of all, is like, if something was like a physical reality, then it's just something you have to deal with. Like if you had a bad right knee, that's just part of your physical reality. But these core issues and things, the ways we interpret ourselves and others, they're entirely made up. They're not real. And so, once again, we let go of illusion in the spiritual path to embrace reality. And in so doing, we find immense freedom. So I think those are my thoughts for today. As always, you can find me blogging over at spiritualawakeningprocess.com. New blogs go up every Monday right now. I'm back in the swing of that. And if you ever have a suggestion for one of these talks, feel free to email me. I hope you're all having a beautiful day, morning, or night, wherever you may be. Take care, everybody.